If you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. I learned this the hard way with my first company, so I created NetSuite, the world's #1 cloud business system. NetSuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make smart decisions and grow with confidence. That's why companies who use NetSuite grow 3 times faster than the S&P 500.
Schedule your free product tour right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show, where we talk key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Today, we're discussing AI governance in 2024 and beyond, plus other technology business headlines for the week. We're live every Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the audio recording is available on major podcast platforms the following week. Thanks to our sponsor, Oracle NetSuite. Their unified cloud business management solution helps organizations operate more effectively and provide real-time visibility into operational and financial performance. ERPA AI members and followers get preferred pricing of 40 to 45% off NetSuite. Just go to erpaai.com/NetSuite to get more information. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up ERPA AI. It's the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. My co-host today is Chris Cerdak, Senior AI Advisor to ERPA AI, author, consultant, former White House Chief Transformation Office Advisor, Partner for Digital Transformation at Gartner, and AI Practice Lead at EY. Chris, good afternoon, my friend.
How are you? And I just realized that I need to get that shirt. It's like a really cool NASA-ish ERPA shirt.
Yeah, well, it's a post-COVID generation, and I don't use any of the stuff in my closet anymore. I don't have to wear it anymore. I was fighting it for a while and wearing it in my home office, and then I said, you know what? Let's just be casual, not pretend that I'm changing my shirt every time I have a meeting.
Don't remind me of the sunk costs and all the ties I bought back when I worked on Wall Street. So
yeah. So good to be with you. A couple of headlines. One of the things that is kind of paramount right now, as you know, Chris, is just where the rubber meets the road on some of these AI use cases. And so I picked out a couple headlines this week on just AI use cases, and then we're going to get into our main topic, which is really the governance of all these things. But a couple announcements this week. Anthropic has come out as a competitor to OpenAI this week, announcing that it's taught its AI model Claude to do a range of things on a computer, including search the web, open applications, and input text using a mouse and keyboard. They gave a couple different demos, one where it completely planned an outing and travel on the user's behalf, another where it built a website to promote itself, and then based on feedback from the user, actually did error checking, went into code, deleted code, and they're saying it's outpacing, according to a couple benchmarks, self-proclaimed, it's outpacing some of the other models on things like software development and operating system usage. But as I saw that, I'm thinking to myself, wow, this sounds a lot like that 3-letter word, robotic process automation.
So yeah, the internet has not been kind to Anthropic since they made that announcement. It reminds me of the old Simpsons episode where Homer goes, "You mean the internet's on computers now?" So apparently now AI is going to be on computers. Yeah, it's exactly what we heard with RPA. Arguably, it might be more powerful, but again, it's just a statistical version of something we've been doing deterministically for 20 years, maybe. So I think it's a little bit of and again, there might be some very useful use cases for this, and more power to them. But is this something that's going to bump up their valuation by $10 billion or something like that? I certainly hope not.
Yeah, and the big asterisk here is, although it again, according to these tests, is beating its competitors, it's still only accurate about 15% of the time compared to a human, which is accurate about 75% of the time, according to these benchmarks. So still a way to go, but it's being used. It's being tested at Canva, Asana, Notion, a couple other big names.
So 15% of the time it's right, which means that 100% of the time you're going to need someone that's highly qualified to review it to make sure that it's right. And so where's the benefit? And who's measuring that benefit after that? Not to be cynical, but again, you got to be really careful about the use cases you use with the tools. And then, they do a demo. How many demos have you and I done collectively in our careers? So, a lot of times what you see in a demo it's hard to replicate in the real world.
That, it's funny you say that, because that was the other asterisk, that I didn't mention, but I thought to myself, we get a lot of providers, right? As you know, right? So, seeing a recorded demo and not a live demo is often a red flag, not always, but so often a red flag. So, we shall see.
I'm pretty sure there's actually a Death Star orbiting our planet right now, and Darth Vader is going to come down and get us, because I saw it on a video once. So,
exactly. Other interesting use case: University of Iowa Health System is implementing AI into its operations based on a survey they did that said 62% of clinicians reported excessive document requirements causing burnout. And so they went ahead and tried to eliminate the 46 minutes of documentation that a primary care physician, for example, has to do for every half-hour appointment that they have. So they tested essentially document management, AI, intelligent document processing, I think, across 2,300 visits, and apparently the providers reported about a 26% reduction in burnout rate as a result of that. So, it's nice to see some of these use cases happening in the real world.
I think, as you know, this one's near and dear to me. I'm working with an AI healthcare startup, and it's precisely for this sort of thing, not only in the collection of a much broader range of data, but then in doing the analytics after the fact to look for insights. So, as much as a lot of people think I'm against the technology, I'm very much for the technology, but let's use it for where it can and should be used. I actually experienced this personally. Locally, I took one of my kids to the doctor, and they were using an AI to record the conversation, to interpret it, to take notes. And I fully agree that it's a great use case as long as the person is doing a good job after the fact to make sure it's captured correctly. So that the patient experience, the doctor, being able to pay attention to the patient, look them in the eye, actually stay engaged, but still meet this documentation requirements, phenomenal use case. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that sort of thing in this, particularly in healthcare. But again, you need the person who really knows what's happening and really has the expertise to double check the work that was produced. So you have to be cautious of what you look at as your cost saving ROI, whatever. But yeah, seeing it hands on, it's kind of good to see some useful use cases out there.
Chipotle is onboarding their new AI assistant for hiring. They're trying to cut hiring time for human staff up to 75%. So it's a recruiting tool, which is supposedly going to be ready by the end of the month, and it's going to help 3,500 stores staff up. So the idea is to make the hiring process more efficient, leverage AI to collect job applications, answer candidate questions, set up meetings, and send offers to hires, and free up managers to focus on overseeing the restaurant. So, outside of all of the concerns we've talked about on this show before around, biases and things like that, sounds like a really interesting way to, maybe not replace people, but actually do something that is bogging down, people within these franchises from doing, arguably what their job really is.
I did a similar post about 3 weeks ago, I think, where a manager submitted a resume for a position he had open for himself and didn't get hired. So he laid off his entire workforce because they were counting on the applicant tracking system, which was rejecting everyone. And I think that post got something like 120,000 views or something. Anyway, clearly ATS finding resources, streamlining the HR process is absolutely critical. And so any advance we can make towards that is very important. I think so the challenge is not only the time of the managers, but the willingness and patience of potential candidates, because a lot of the recruiting processes out there are so counterproductive, anti-productive, and have such incredibly low yields that people just aren't trying anymore. I think you see the notes where like 85% of everyone on LinkedIn is looking for a new job, and more than 80% admit to quiet quitting. So, the technology is great, but I think we have to remember that most valuable work is done by humans. And if we're going to invest a lot more time and energy and money into automation, then let's the benefit that comes from that, maybe we need to reinvest in being more human with our employees and putting the human back in human resources.
So the other one that kind of got my attention this morning is OpenAI and Microsoft have announced this $10 million partnership with a bunch of local media publishers, including Chicago Public Media, Minnesota Star Tribune, Newsday Group, which is here in New York where I am, and Lenfest Institute for Journalism. So, there's this battle going on, right? News Corp filed another lawsuit yesterday against Perplexity, alleging massive copyright infringement, with stories from Wall Street Journal and the New York Post. New York Times has a cease and desist notice to Perplexity, and I think there's some ongoing, I'm not sure the status of ongoing letters, lawsuits, litigation with OpenAI as well. But then here's an example of partnership, right? And I can only think that, this is I was going to say it's a good thing. I think it's an opportunity for some of the smaller or mid-sized regional media companies to maybe, get a competitive edge over their larger counterparts. But certainly I'm thinking that it's also going to kind of help these AI companies get access to more and more, non-copyright violating news, right?
Boy, I would sure like to see the terms and conditions that they're asking.
I knew you were going to go there. Yeah.
Well, the other thing, the first thought that came to mind when you mentioned it is, okay, $10 million is what, 4 seconds of electricity in their data centers, maybe? So, I think both the creation, harvesting, and then ownership or possession of content and copyright there too is going to, it's already becoming a huge factor. And the thing is, we're going to be looking at a good decade at least of significant litigation where it's not going to be clear what the right answer is. We've sort of seen this before, but the amount of money that's potentially at stake here is such that it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight from a litigation and a regulation perspective. So you can expect this issue of who owns the copyright, who owns the training data, to be really clear as mud for a good decade or so. So plan accordingly, I think. And that leads straight into our next conversation on AI governance. How do you manage the potential risk associated with that?
Yeah. So, for those that don't know, you recently spoke at a AI governance conference and kind of presented on AI governance. And no surprise, you had something kind of, I think, controversial in there, although maybe it's not these days. Where I think your argument is that it's the idea of governing AI is almost like a paradox, like it's not actually possible in reality. Is that interpretation correct?
Yeah, literally, as I'm on stage presenting, I was struck with sort of the phrase of it's critical that we govern AI because AI is ungovernable, and very much a paradox, but that's the nature of the technology. If we're training this stuff basically on all the content that ever existed on the internet, and we've pretty rapidly reached that point to the point now we're using AI to manufacture data to use to train AI. That alone should scare us to pieces. But if we're trying to get that much information into the system, and the technology is by its very nature a black box, so we're taking everything that ever was, putting it through an unknown entity, and then we're trying to figure out what it learned along the way by how it responds on the back end. okay, there's some argument that that might be how we learn as humans as well. But the challenge that I think that brings from a governance perspective is inherently you've trained it some probably pretty bad stuff. And the way that you'll figure out that it learned something kind of bad is when something kind of bad happens. And so governance then becomes sort of chasing your own tail to a certain extent and trying to predict the risk associated with things that are unknowable, unguessable, and potentially untestable until they actually go wrong. So that's, and not to overblow it, but that's a whole, as someone who always worked in reliability and mission success and things like that, that's stacking a lot of guesswork and a lot of errors and hoping for the best along the way. So the discussion around AI governance has to be a lot less about putting up, preventing problems, because the problems are going to be inherent and they're going to happen. It's more how do you build resiliency into the processes in which you're using the technology. How do you put up how do you put up those protections so that if something goes horribly wrong, you know it when it happens, it's reversible, I can undo what was done, and then it's also sort of recoverable. Like if you have a hiccup for a couple of hours or a couple of days, your business doesn't suffer a fatal injury. And those are so the governance discussion really needs to be more serious around that post-training, and then pre-training, doing everything you possibly can to shape the training data so that you reduce the number of bad things the AI is learning along the way.
So, I mean, this seems like kind of an obvious question, but if the costs you alluded to and the risks are so high, why do you think so many are insistent on AI adoption? And I cautiously use the term adoption because it's been my observation, at least in the last year, as I speak to members, that everybody is talking about it. Most people are dabbling. A lot less are actually implementing at scale. But what's the appeal? What are they really trying to do? Are they just checking the box to say, hey, I'm doing AI too? Or are there real fundamental changes happening, within these organizations?
Yeah, I think a lot of the research shows that there's a strong polarity in exactly what you're saying. There are a very small number of users that are, no kidding, adopting the technology, coming up with awesome use cases, blowing things out of the water. And then the vast majority of other people aren't adopting, they're engaging, right? They're doing, like we saw in RPA, right? We're going to do a proof of concept. Well, there's nothing conceptual, so you're just dabbling. So I think there's a lot of dabbling and a lot of trying to figure out what it can do, what are the associated risks, but just being able to say that you're working on it. My sunrise is coming up, always bugs me. So a handful of people are going to be really successful, and then because they're just sort of dabbling in it, no one's really looking at the risk side. There's more. I think a lot of it is FOMO. You and I have discussed in the past too, right? If everybody's saying this is this amazing technology, it's going to be transformational, then I at least need to be playing with it a little bit so that I don't miss out on what's potentially going to come. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of that, but no one's really articulating the big risks and the potential big costs because no one's really incurred them yet. We haven't had the big Sony moments of, oh my gosh, we've had a hack or penetrated. Those sorts of things haven't really hit yet, but it's just a question of time. And again, that risk is going to be unarticulated and unarticulatable until we run into it.
Yeah, I wonder, and I think that the balance is shifting. To use an expression of a mutual colleague of ours, the risk of doing nothing is going to start exceeding the risk of doing something, right? And so I think that's why RPA maybe was you can't say it wasn't widely adopted. Was it widely successful at scale? I think it depends on who you ask. And so, some of this AI technology have the ability to really be transformational in a way that people wanted RPA to be, software automation to be, intelligent automation to be. I wonder. But if it is inevitable, um, how do you mitigate the risks of something that you say is inherently ungovernable, Chris?
Well, and so I'm from giving that presentation. That's now the outline for an upcoming books targeted for executives that are asking exactly this question. And there's a handful of quick questions you can ask to figure out, do you have a good use case? This is going to be very, very use case specific, much like RPA was. RPA, if you could define the hard set rules for the given process you want to automate or the given step you want to automate, if you could reverse what you did, again, I mentioned that a moment ago, if the long-term impacts of a failure were recoverable, not fatal, and if you could do those things, then you might have a good use case. The same is going to be true with RPA, or I'm sorry, with AI. The difference is that AI is just guesswork, right? It's taking a best guess. RPA was implemented according to rules that you set up, and as long as you followed the rules, you were good. AI steps into the world of intelligent automation when I don't know exactly the right answer and I want to take a best guess. So AI is just a gigantic statistical amplifier. It's taking best guesses as to what you need. If you can live with it being wrong for a given step in a given process, you might have a good use case. And if at the same time you're actually benefiting, you're saving some time, some money, some focus, some energy, right? So we get back to the ROI of the use case. To a doctor who has to do half an hour of writing up a document, instead of spending that half an hour focusing on the patient, the automated note taker might be a really useful use case. Unless that doctor then has to spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes re-reviewing what the AI wrote for them so they know it's correct. And if they miss something, if there was something misstated in one of those AI notes that was taken, I now have a $20 million lawsuit. And that's what we're going to see coming up. So the analysis, the assessment of potential use cases, and the risk of being wrong are going to be fundamental to coming up with meaningful business positive use cases.
And then you have the regulatory thing, right? I mean, for the first time in at least my career, the regulations seem to be keeping up with, or as close as they can be, right? Pretty much keeping up with the technology. In some cases, I think even overreaching ahead of the technology, with some of these kind of blanket, regulations that kind of oversimplify some of these technologies. I think we talked last week or the week before about AI calling agents and how the U.S. FTC has basically gone out and said we just can't do it because it was used for political campaigns and things. But so you have kind of the inherent risks of just doing this from a business standpoint. But now you don't know. You could be investing, as a lot of organizations that I'm aware of were on the sales side with those sales agents. You could be investing hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars into a technology that, some agency may just come out and ban in 3 weeks, right? So how do you deal with that, or how do you stay proactive with that?
Well, you're noting something that is unique and troubling around the world of regulatory compliance issues. You want the law to be trailing behind what you're doing with technology, right? You want the ability to innovate. You want rewards to be there for people that are going to take reasonable risks and trying to adopt new technologies. And then the point of regulation is if something goes wrong, you kind of make sure it doesn't happen again, right? So I saw a note that in the history of the United States, we come up with 2 new bureaus or agencies every year that the U.S. has existed. So we've been around for like 250 years, and we have something like 500 different bureaus and agencies in the federal bureaucracy. So there's no shortage of opportunity to try to control things and put barriers around them. But you usually want it to be after something has gone sort of wrong, so you have some guidance. And I think with AI, the hype was so astronomical, and the fears that it might get out of control were so stupendous that a lot of regulatory agencies I think, we're being proactive in trying to put controls in place, but we may find that they either were misgiven or were, sort of misguided. I know in California they were trying to pass a law that the regulatory compliance was wrapped around how much money you invested in building your model. Well, that's because that represents the current spend that's going into that, and it's $500 billion. So people want to control that kind of flow of money. Was that a reasonable approach based upon the abilities or power of the tools? Not necessarily. I think the ability of the tool is very much an independent variable. So again, it might be an example of sort of being a little misguided. Then if I look at the EU, which very rapidly released some guidance and so forth, because they had some, in their minds, legitimate fears, but they've also completely shut down, to a large extent, any investment from people innovating within the EU in this space. So maintaining compliance is going to be really tough. By the same token, some of the biggest players are literally making stuff up as they go, completely faking their financials. And recently, there was an announcement of the expected earnings for, come out and say it, OpenAI. But then they footnoted and said, well, this excludes all the training costs that we anticipate over the next 10 years. Well, training costs is like 80% of the spend. So it ends up being a completely made up number. I'm going to be 80% profitable if I discount 80 or 90% of my costs. And anybody that's ever done an ROI knows what's going on with that. So I think we want the compliance people to be cognizant of what's happening, but not get too far ahead of themselves. And then you as a business person, if you're thinking about using the technology, just be very well read in what's happening in this space. And always, again, the guidance is going to be, can I reverse what was done? What happens if something goes horribly wrong? And what's the overall impact on my business? If I'm counting on, say, ChatGPT for a core business process and it goes down for 5 days, can I recover from that? And what does my business look like if I lose that capability for 5 days? Because it's legitimately something you're going to have to worry about.
Yeah, and Chris, you actually created an AI readiness assessment that we've made available for members. It's a free survey. You'll get a result live. So if you want to check that out, it's irfaai.com/AI readiness. And there's also at the end of that a link to schedule a call if you need more help or want to just get a kind of an industry briefing. But Chris, you talk in your presentation at this event about the 7 R's of AI governance. I think you alluded to a few of them. Is this kind of what you're talking about when you talk about whether an organization is ready or has a framework in place for the governance?
Yeah, exactly. It's, again, resilience, recoverability, reliability. Can I really count on this thing to work correctly if I'm using it? So I was trying to, we have frameworks all over the place. I was trying to build up a framework that makes this more addressable, digestible by business executives, right? People that aren't necessarily deeply technical, people that aren't necessarily, spending every day with a compliance person or litigator, but to kind of digest the problem a little bit better. People can get really deep in the weeds with the mathematics and so forth. So trying to make it a little bit more accessible to people to ask those questions that sort of frame the question of governance and frame the question of risk. I frequently use the example, having driven in Germany, the guardrails on the Autobahn aren't there to prevent accidents or keep people alive. It's there to simplify the cleanup after an accident, right? You're going 150, you're not going to survive it. We're just going to make it easier to figure out what you did wrong. And a lot of the governance activity, I think, that's going on right now is sort of that disaster preparedness. You need that, but I would like to see us use governance as a way of making better decisions before you engage, before you invest. And it's very similar to what we saw in RPA for the last 10 plus years, as you well know, Dan. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it so that the stakes are much higher now. If you broke a rule with an RPA bot, okay, that's not necessarily the end of the world, although I know some really bad use cases. But if you're counting on something that's just making best guesses, which is what AI is doing, the possibility of something going really wrong actually is much higher. as is the probably the order of magnitude of trouble it causes when it does go wrong. And that's just why we need to be more careful.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. I was thumbing through your deck, and you have this this hype cycle graphic. Explain to us, you know, where you think we are, you know, in relation to this hype cycle. Do you think that we're still kind of in the overhype zone?
And so, as you know, I did previously work for Gartner, and I think the whole world, you know, loves Gartner hype cycles, and they're actually a pretty good reflection of what's going on out there. To me, what's interesting is so now agentic AI has been hitting. I actually saw a chart, I think, on LinkedIn the other day where we're hitting peak hype on agentic AI. It's only been around for a couple of months, realistically. So I would say we are on the trough of disillusion at kind of the top of that. Where you see like edge AI and foundational models and so forth. I think a little bit of the shine is off the apple. I think people are getting a little bit skeptical. And now we're seeing more research and we're seeing more use cases that, hey, this doesn't really work the way we've been told. So I think if you look at something like Agenic, that's an attempt to keep the hype going. So it's a little bit on the right or the left-hand side of the hype cycle. But I think the pragmatics are falling more on we're entering the trough of disillusionment, which is disappointing for many people. But to me, this is where the actual work kind of gets done. When we get past the FOMO and, oh my gosh, I have to adopt this no matter what, and into all right, how can we actually use this and get something useful out of it? So I think if you sort of look past Agenic or some of the other more recent attempts to re-buzzify AI, and instead look at just some foundational use cases like recording medical appointments, things like that, I think you're going to see a lot of people actually making some significant progress there, as long as they sort of avoid the shiny penny that the industry is going to keep putting out there to justify another $100 billion spend.
Yeah, I wonder if this iteration, and I say iteration, under the category of just, every next wave of technology that comes, gets this hype, and you've been around for a bunch of them. I've been around for the last few as well. Automation for sure, AI. But is this one different just because of how democratized it is? Where 20 years ago, the average user couldn't get the benefit of outsourcing. Okay, maybe they got the benefit of cloud when they swiped their credit card and did the shadow IT thing and got on AWS. But RPA, not easy to implement, right? But I mean, this number you're having, over 200 million people interacting with ChatGPT. At some point, does it just become I don't think it is, right? I don't think it's a question. This groundswell of people wanting to get the benefits and implement it. So I guess my question is this happening because the technology is really there, or is this just happening because it's a wildfire, right?
I think it's a combination of both. I saw a podcast with Mark Andreessen, I think he recorded it last week, where they were asking him, how is this different? As one of the fathers of the internet, at least the explosion of the web-based internet. And they asked Andreessen, is this different? Is it bigger than the internet? And he made the point, there's only been 4 or 5 or 6 really society-changing technologies that have hit us. Steam engines and electricity and petroleum use, radio, and he felt that this was one of them. And what was interesting, he made the comment that I agree with. The internet was a huge revolution, but a lot of stuff had to happen first, right? Everyone had to buy a PC. Everyone had to figure out how to use a PC. Everyone had to download AOL and figure out how to use it, right? There was a lot of things that had to front load the internet taking off the way it did, which is why it took about 10 years to really explode and become the bubble that eventually burst. Here, there's no barriers to entry like that. As soon as ChatGPT was adopted by 200 million people within like a couple of weeks of it being released a little over 2 years ago. So there are 0 barriers to entry. And while doing statistical, this is just machine learning, it's statistics. We've been doing that for a very long time. The fact that ChatGPT was a general release for anybody that wanted to ask it anything. All you had to do is download the app. Is what made it really unique and different and special, I think. and also is the source of the challenge with it. You have 200 million people asking, I don't know, a couple billion questions a day, and most of those people don't know the correct answer to the question they're asking. You're teaching it to get dumber. And that's exactly what the research has shown. Yeah, if I ask a question and you respond to me statistically with the most likely answer, but it's the wrong answer, and I don't know any better, I just trained it to give the wrong answer. And you do that enough times, and the system will actually get dumber. And that's a lot of what researchers have found. So again, use case specific. The general release to the population at large was tactically a great idea. It's what really made it blow up and made OpenAI and ChatGPT a household name. And it's what helped facilitate and accelerate the land grab that was kind of going on. But it also is the source, more strategically, of the significant problems that we're having, such as stupefaction of the system, giving wrong answers, hallucinations, etc. Cat's out of the bag at this point. So now we just need to go back to AI governance. It's okay, if that's what's happened and that's what's out there for us to use, how do we mitigate the negatives that are associated with the approach that was taken?
Yeah, we briefly mentioned in the headlines at the beginning the HR use case at Chipotle. That was more about the hiring and recruiting process. I'm wondering, what is the advice you're giving to HR managers who are actually being asked to look at the org chart and say, hey, what people, what types of people, what functions do we need people to do now, and which ones can we cut? Add a layer of cost cutting and economic conditions to that. What's your advice to anybody listening, watching this, in HR who's being asked to make those decisions?
So I think, as we saw in the RPA industry for 10 years, the goal of RPA was cut, right? To supplant people, replace people with bots. And that worked with varying degrees of success. And I think you and I are well, and many people in the audience are well aware of use cases where you could cut a lot of people. The challenge here is that AI, as it's being implemented right now, can support people. It's going to be very hard for it to supplant people. The supplanting of people is in really low grade use cases where being wrong kind of doesn't matter. It's sort of that interaction with a customer support person. So level 1 support of customers, you can possibly do that. But what you're then going to do is you're going to amplify the need of special expertise in humans to deal with whatever percent the automation can't handle. And it also means that you need to have more people in an oversight role, making sure that AI doesn't get stuff wrong, because it's going to make mistakes. And the only person who's going to know that the AI made a mistake is someone with enough expertise in the question at hand. So it's going to have this, actually, and I predicted this over a decade ago, this AI in particular is going to have a very unexpected and antithetical, I think, impact, where as we implement it, you're going to need more and more of your top people, and top people are going to be more and more the constraint in your business processes, because I need someone to monitor what the AI is doing. That's going to require sufficient expertise. And so your most talented people, your most talented doctor, let's say, is going to be in even more demand, because they're going to need to look at the automated work from everyone else. And so people kind of at the low end of skills or talents and whatever it is you're hiring for, they can be automated away, but it's low impact anyway. Conversely, the people at the very high end of talent and ability are going to be in even greater demand. They're going to be even more of a process bottleneck, and they're going to demand even more, vastly higher wages as a result. And we're already seeing that. I mean, you see these job offers for supposed CAIO or people with AI expertise getting offered $700, $800, $1 million a year salaries. So that's an amplified effect. But in general, HR people and people that are looking at the resources within the organization need to get really sensitive to the fact that, how do I figure out who my best people are, and how do I keep them? And so that I can really leverage the automation as I deploy it. It's going to be more critical than ever, and the demand for those people is going to be astronomical.
So last question, and it's kind of one part crystal ball, future predictions and AI, and one part just, advice, because we do seem like we're in this, I agree with you, this kind of paradoxical point, fork in the road in a sense. So, if we're moving, as you say, towards kind of some reckless development driven by a desire to innovate and control, how do you balance this drive with caution and try to prevent some of the negative consequences as we, go out over the next couple of years and advance AI?
I think it's use case dependence. Read. I'm actually, this one startup I'm working with, we're literally just putting together a broad range of research papers and so forth so that someone can immerse themselves in this pretty quickly. And so breadth of exposure, I think, is more important necessarily than depth of exposure. Do you need to go out and learn linear algebra and the architecture of matrix math so you can figure out how to write your own transformers? Probably not. Do you need to read a couple of papers on use cases in actual use in your industry? Try to follow people that seem to be leading the charge in your industry, but be a fast follower of those folks. And be a bit skeptical of what you hear. Yeah. So I think exposure is important. I think trying to keep up as broadly as possible. And then try to mitigate a little bit of the FOMO. Oh my gosh, I'm falling too far behind. Make some investments, work with the tools, get some people that are open to innovate with that. But again, keep some guardrails around that so that they don't get too far afield. They don't get too deep into deployments. They don't get too deep into investments until you're really certain you understand the potential negatives of the technology and the potential negatives that could occur if it does something you don't anticipate. Because it will do things you don't anticipate. It's just a question of when, and you don't want it to be too much of a surprise when it inevitably happens. That's just the math.
Yep. Well, we'll leave it there, Chris. Thanks so much for sharing that. If you want to copy the presentation that Chris presented at AI Governance World, let us know. You could also schedule a free networking call to connect with any of our industry experts or other members from our global network. Just go to irpaai.com/networking. The assessment I mentioned is available at irpaai.com/AI readiness. And we'll see you next Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. Chris, thank you, buddy. Have a great week, everybody.
Take care, folks.